That was a very nice introduction. Please tell me to yell. Unfortunately, last night I did inhale a little bit too much barley flour from my other job, so it's a little sore. OSHA isn't on. We're not big enough for OSHA yet, so I didn't have my mask on. So what I'm going to talk about today is kind of a part of a presentation that the Environmental Studies program helped fund so I could get out to the Composting Council in Orlando. It's a professional, or it's an industry meeting, so a lot of the talks are commercials for a product. But they still let academics and researchers in once in a while and talk about, the practical sides of things. And what I presented down there is a little different than what I'm going to talk about today, but I'm going to have some of the same things. But the U.S. Composting Council isn't just about compost. It's about really the best and highest use of organic matter. And the theme at this year's meeting was really, let's prevent making waste in the first place. And that's an overarching goal that I think we should all have. Don't make the waste, and then we don't have to worry about what to do with it. And I think that's going to be something that's going to be very important in the county and the cities as a whole, universities, and for individuals, is changing that mindset to, do I need this in the first place? I could talk about a lot of the seminar, the talks that I went to, but quickly, the most interesting one was doing a life cycle analysis of a tomato with respect to waste. And everybody's pushing compostable plastics for shipping things. And when you do it for the United States, the biggest cost is just transit. And putting it in a compostable, plastic thing doesn't matter. If it's not in a huge box and and shipped en masse, the packaging doesn't matter. It was just the transit. Now, in developing countries, the packaging hugely matters and the production cycle matters because the technology isn't there to keep a perfectly intact fruit. And even in developing countries, people like to buy that perfect tomato. It was an interesting way of looking at things. And the guy actually got booed by a compostable plastic seller that were saying, compostable plastics are great, but we should be thinking about how we transport our food and not what we put in it. So that's interesting fact. I want to give you some demographic data. Even though we're all from Rockbridge County, we all have our different niches in Rockbridge County. Quick little outline. I'm going to go through demographics, kind of how we currently operate in the county. I'm not going to talk a lot about what we do in Washington Lee. I'll give some insight into that. And then talk about composting status in the county, where it's being done, what are the opportunities, some of the challenges, and then future possibilities. And please, if I say something you disagree with, and you've got facts better than mine, please share them. I like that. I am presenting this as more of a community member than a representative of Washington and Lee, except when I'm talking about what we do here on campus. But anything I say about what the cities or the county is doing is what I read in the paper or information that I've gotten from the appropriate people. So everybody hopefully knows the rough location of Rockbridge County. I don't need to review that. But the county, just so you know, particularly for students, you may not know the basic structure. The county has a board of supervisors with 5 districts across the county. Board of supervisors, how often do they come up for election? Every 4 years. So there can be some dynamic change there. People aren't re-elected and things like that. Lexington and Buena Vista have mayors and city councils operating their structure. Then we have 3 universities, which we all are familiar with. Southern Virginia has about 600 students. Virginia Military Institute has about 1,600, and then we have about 2,200 students. When we think about other aspects of kind of what our population is made up of, the cities are roughly around 7,000. And then the county, separate from the 2 cities right now, is right around 2,300, 23,000, I think is the current number. But when you look at the total number of cows in the county, you start getting into some good numbers. We have about 30,000 cows. 2,000 of those are dairy. And I'll point out why I'm talking about the dairy numbers. Of that 2,000 dairy, 1,000 of those are production. This is all data I got from Tom Stanley at the Cooperative Extension. Then there are 16,000 cows that are in cow-calf operations. So producing beef cows a little bit and get shipped off for other places. 12,000 of those, and then 12,000 calves. So 16,000 mothers producing 12,000 calves on average each year. Cow-calf operations, they're grazing, they're out in the fields, so doing anything with their residual waste is not an opportunity. With dairy cows, I'll talk about some of those opportunities a little bit. There's lots of produce production, the local food movement. We should be keeping our organic matter here, fertilizing our soils. We have a history of, with this cow calf operations, maybe of using our soils and overgrazing things. And I think compost, I'll argue, will be a good opportunity for improving that land down the road if we can produce it and bringing it back into a more stable system. Increasing hop production, and I'm not pitching that just because I'm a brewer, but there's lots of hop farms going up in the county and surrounding area. Stan Driver, who's up in Greenville, is actively pursuing that, and with the number of breweries that are around here, it's a great opportunity. And we have 5 vineyards and 2 breweries. And they produce waste as well. I need to look into what the vineyards do with their waste, but anytime an organic matter stream is produced, it's an opportunity to capture it and use it for its highest and best use, and I'll point out what some of those are. And we also have the Horse Center. Catherine Truitt, I sent her an email, she's not here, but the director of the Horse Center, they have a huge issue with shavings. Some of you may have gotten and collected them. Depending on the breed of the horse, they can have horse shavings up to their bellies or barely any horse shavings in the stalls, depending on the breed of horse. So they go through, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's many metric tons of shavings with a little bit of manure mixed in, but it's an interesting feedstock that poses some problems. But a useful feedstock if we're going to start talking about composting. So current operation, we have 2 independent cities. Both have curbside waste and curbside recycling. I believe PV is still maintaining their curbside recycling, last I heard. Only fall leaf pickup. Was it a year ago that lawn clippings were banned, or 2 years ago in the city of Lexington? 4 years ago? Time flies. That was a great move. I mean, just in my development, Fairwinds, people are doing something with it. And I don't think it's going in garbage bags, I hope. But we are doing this. And recyclables are a huge part of the waste stream. I'll talk about waste stream dynamics in a little bit. In the county, there are 40 dumpster locations spread throughout the county. Some of them are far-reaching and some of them are right next to each other. I had a dumpster map in my talk for Florida, but some are right next to each other, and then others you really have to drive really far, so it's a rather interesting way we get rid of our waste. And then there are 2 convenience centers for misspelled recyclables. For dropping off recyclables, and they also drop off books for rereading and things like that. And those recycling centers are actually, those convenience centers are great centers. Although the dumpster locations, unpoliced, and things can get put in the wrong place, and the wrong things can get put into the garbage cans as well. And there's no separation of organics. I guess at some of the dumpster locations, they do have a dumpster dedicated to yard waste and large limbs, but it gets commingled, unfortunately. So there are lots of issues involved there. And then we do have private haulers and contractors. Do I need to answer that, Chris?
Not mine.
Just a reminder. I'm not lecturing, so I'm not going to answer somebody's phone. Although I've been on sabbatical, so I'm jonesing for a lecture. This is good. And then we have to deal with private haulers and contractors and what they do with their works. But that's a small number. All waste goes into the county landfill. It's scheduled to close in 2012. Was scheduled to close. And then it got an extension to January 1st, 2015. A transfer station has been built at the landfill for county use, but the 2 independent cities have a contract with RRR, if I'm correct, for a transfer station that's yet to be built or utilized. And the transfer station really isn't currently operating as a material recovery facility. It's being used to pull out large things. So when they're dumping the trash, if there's a fridge in there, they'll pull that out. But it's not truly a material recovery facility. But that transfer station could act as that facility where you can separate, you can source separate, or separate at that facility and get your organics out, recyclables, and things like that. Oh, as far as tonnage, we produced about 46,000 tons in 2012. 62% of that came from the county, 18% came from Lexington, 10% came from DV, and 10% came from private haulers. So the county certainly is the largest input, but the cities together, they're making up another 38% of that. So even if the cities wanted to make a choice, that could be a large, significant change. But really, to knock out and change what's going into the landfill, we all have to work together. Tipping fees are really cheap. When I went to the composting meeting, they asked me what tipping fees, $24 a ton. There are some places in West Texas where it's that cheap, and there are areas where it's that low. But the national average for tipping fees right now is, it's a commodity, but it's right around $78 a ton. And the range is huge. Growing up in New Jersey, we don't even dump waste in New Jersey anymore because, well, we won't have New Jersey jokes.
Bring it down to Virginia is what you're doing.
Yeah, when it comes to Virginia. But what happened with the landfill and why it really got extended is really with the economic downturn, there was a reduction in construction and demolition debris. Really, and W&L isn't sending nearly as much over. I don't know if VMI sending their. I know when we're doing construction now, we're sending it to be recycled. A lot of the debris is going to Richmond or some other place that's handling it. But we're really the main sources now of construction debris. It's starting to pick back up, but houses just aren't being built. The county, I was told, banned landscape waste going into the landfill. It's really being bunkered and stored with plans for using a cap. And the main reason the extension was needed, it was essentially if they had to close it in 2012, we would have had to import trash to get the volume large enough to actually close the landfill. You can't close a partially filled landfill. That's my understanding that I got from people. Chris, does that not sound appropriate, or that's not correct? Well, I've heard lots of stories, and this is where I like having these open forums because I can maybe get some more information. But I won't give my sources, but that's what I was told. But either way, we had room, so why not use the landfill? But there is interest now, and the county is pursuing a lined landfill. The current one is an unlined landfill. We have karst geology, which creates all the wonderful sinkholes that we have in Rockbridge County. But when you put a landfill, and there's near some karst geology, they tell me that the clay is super thick and it's a great place for a landfill. But it's unlined right now, and the question is, what happens over time? They're monitoring it, all the wells are good, but the county is pursuing getting a lined landfill in there and extending it, and it could be up to 40 to 50-year landfill, at least. Whether we have a new landfill or we're trucking out our trash, I think we should keep our organic matter here. And that's going to be my argument. Is why, if we're, even if a lot of our organic matter may come from somewhere else, let's keep it here and do good things with it, whether it's energy or compost, and both. Quite often you can do both of those things, make energy and produce high quality compost. So that's what I'm going to walk through a little bit now. Composting. Since 2002, Chris and I have been composting at W&L. All veggie prep waste, we average anywhere from 12 to 20 tons of input into the system, and 3 to 6 finished cubic yards a year of finished compost. Got some compost crew members here. And we've been doing that since 2002. There's a lot of things we could do on campus to make that better, but likewise, if we had a community, a county and city-based organics collection, we could stop doing it and put our inputs into it. And I've got some information on our campus waste audit that I'll share with you at the end if there's some time, to give you an idea of waste streams and how they vary based on kind of the type of building that you're in. We've had the earth tub. There's Bonnie Fay, who's just finishing up her vet degree. We've had that since 2007. It's been good, but we've had some troubles using that as well. Compostable takeout matter. We have this. This is compostable, right?
Yes.
Well, we don't have any collection bins in this building for this. And we're actually not collecting any of this. It doesn't make it out to the composter, so it's actually pointless. But I won't get into those issues right now as to why that takes place. We distributed over 400 earth machines. So some of you may own an earth machine. I think I have a picture here. No, I don't. It pops up at the end. There it is. Animations. We sold about 200 of these. Teresa Hanlon and I, if anybody remembers Teresa Hanlon way back. And then we bought another round, Chris and I, through this university. And then the county bought another 150 to 200 and sold them at the convenience center. Endorsement told me that I called them up and they said, you've ordered 400 since you started ordering them. So that's the total number we sold. These are backyard composters, great for food scraps, paper, butter, any type of wrapping that can be compostable you can throw in there. They don't produce tons of high quality compost, but you're not sending that stuff to the landfill. The Virginia Horse Center attempted a windrow program or getting one going. And that just kind of fell apart because their board of trustees at the Horse Center just didn't feel that it was financially a good decision. Pat Foreman was very interested in also incorporating chickens into that project, very much like the project that is up in Vermont that produces high quality eggs and high quality compost at the same time. 8 restaurants have vegetable scraps collected. Mitch Wapner goes around and picks them up. He actually gets all the spent grain from Blue Out Brewing and actually feeds it to his chickens. So that's a higher use than composting it. And they make high quality waste. VMI does get black bear composting for special events, right? For at least for Virginia, Environment Virginia and other times. And black bear is getting bigger and permitted to handle more. They are willing to come down to Lexington and pick up waste. They certainly couldn't handle all of the county's waste, but they could do targeted areas depending on how it's collected. And then the city schools have tried. Principal Dowd had composting going 2 years ago, and it was going really well, but then he had some health issues and things kind of fell apart. I'm meeting with him next week to maybe get that fired back up again and help him with the gardening project over there. The PTA at Waddell, for a year and a half, we were composting everything in the lunchroom at Waddell. It was going really well, but we had some issues with some pests in the garden there. So to make it work for the rest of the year so we didn't lose that educational value with those kindergartners and first graders and second graders that really had never seen it before, I hauled it over here to W&L so that we didn't fall apart. It's no longer taking place. But we were averaging probably 80 to 90 pounds a day out of Waddell's food service program. It was huge. And it's because kids don't eat their food. It gets into the whole other issue of, stuff gets put on their plate because the USDA says it has to be there, and they don't want it, and they're not going to eat it if they don't want to. And at Wilbur Downing, the kids have a choice. They're older, so they can pick and choose. It's more of an a la carte, and they had a lot less waste. And they have a salad bar, and kids at that age are starting to get into salads. And it's less of a waste. So these are some of the things that we tried. We have lots of agriculture, and biosolids is another word for what's left over after the wastewater treatment plant. I think our biosolids are about, it's 14% water, or 14% solids, 86% water. They're pretty liquid. They're spreadable with a liquid spreader. I don't know the exact number, but the biosolids from the wastewater treatment plant. We have lots of poultry waste around here, but none of it stays in Rockbridge County because it's a commodity for the poultry producer. So they export it, and it gets turned into cockadoodle poo. That's what most of ours gets turned into. It goes up to Harrisonburg, and you can buy it at the farmer's co-op. It's a high quality composted chicken manure. It has antibiotics in some cases. But we have lots of dairy waste that supplies liquid manure. Anybody driven up through Fairfield when those trucks are spreading, that's a pleasant experience. The kids at Fairfield Elementary, I just feel for them. It's always at like lunchtime, and they've got those tanker trucks just spraying liquid manure. And then biosolids are applied as liquid. We had issues with getting the biosolids applied. I haven't talked to anybody that need to talk to them more recently, but there are issues with when they can be applied. It can't be too wet, it can't be too dry because of runoff. And biosolids do have, I think, slightly higher levels of heavy metals. So applying in the fields do have some other environmental issues, particularly then if it's going into grass, it's then turning into beef. Now there can be some concerns there. EPA says there isn't, so we should be fine, right? And since we are in the Chesapeake watershed, we have further regulations because of nitrogen making its way into our local waterways. Here's a map of the dairy farms that exist that are in close, well, these are all the dairy farms that Tom Stanley could give me that had large enough herds. And if anybody knows this map better, please share. But what you can notice is we definitely have a cluster up here in the northern part of the county. And what's taking place in Vermont is that, you know, it's a highly green state, but farmers are coming together in cooperatives, producing methane and electricity with their animal waste, still getting a high quality compost product out after they produce electricity. And they're getting, you know, it's not one farmer getting the electricity, but it's a shared plant that then is reducing their bills because they're putting a feedstock into it. And then they still get material that can be spread on their fields. And many of these dairy farms, you know, these are confined animals, so it's not like they need to spread this on fields. Some of the farmers have a harder time with getting rid of it, and they actually just share it with another farmer that may do large crops. That's what's taking place up in Fairfield. But it is an issue, and many of these are in areas that are near creeks that feed into larger rivers, and one of these things let loose, it would be an environmental disaster. So this is, I think this represents about a 9-mile stretch. So it's an interesting idea to think about. If we could find a way to have, this would be Bark Electric that would have to sign off on this. Of course, Dominion just signed, the PPAs are allowed now up to certain sizes. Dominion backed off, and the legislature actually passed something there. But I think Bark would probably be more interested in something like this if we could get the farmers together and thinking about this and convincing them that it's a worthwhile endeavor. But that represents, I think, if I have my numbers right, too many numbers in my head to remember all of them. I think this is about 1,100 dairy cows, and that would be enough to produce a significant amount of electricity that would be if they could sell it back to Bark. And Bark has an interest in getting green energy. All energy companies do, and Virginia is finally pushing energy companies towards that. It would be a viable choice. Some of the challenges that we've kind of run into. I'm going to come back to composting in a little bit. We've had changes in leadership, board of supervisors change, mayors change, all those types of things, standard things. The economy has been the biggest issue, I think. Is it worthwhile investing in some of these things? And I'm going to talk about the costs and some of these issues. Getting private-public relationships working can work. It doesn't always work. But education is what I personally like to see my role as being involved in, is explaining to people why this is a good thing to do and why it matters. And I think we have a great opportunity with the local food movement and being able to turn our economy around in Rockbridge County to say, we keep our organic matter here, we grow vegetables, we grow animals with improved soils, and it can be a marketing program for the counties and the cities that are involved in that. Now here's a bunch of technologies. I wanted to get into my summary of the beginning talk before I got into the details of composting, because I think composting is a good thing to do. This is, I borrowed this, many people showed this at the meeting, so I just retyped it because all of the slides were copyright protected from the meeting. But some of these, well, mine is too, so they do that for a good reason. They didn't ask me not to. So anaerobic digestion. Anaerobic digestion is a process where in the absence of oxygen, you essentially ferment things and biogas is produced. And that biogas is cleaned up, goes into a generator, a gas generator, and produces electricity. It's proven for select waste streams up in the Northeast. A lot of the processing plants of fish and dairy products, these make really good, high quality waste streams, are doing this. And they're, half of the plant's power is being produced from their waste. What I like about AT, though, is what comes out the other end, all the solids that left over, can be added into a compost procedure and actually increase the value of the compost. So in conjunction with compost, you can have value added while getting electricity out of your system. I'll talk a little bit about some of the Germany and Spain projects that are doing that kind of same thing, composting / electricity production. There's some odor issues, risks. Risk and environmental considerations we could interpret for a day or so. We could go back and forth with the pros and cons. But I don't completely disagree with most of these. It's limited based on the composition of the waste, but it has to be 100% organic. The process is such that you're pumping things around. If you have any contamination, it can cause lots of problems. So it has to be a very clean waste stream. But it can only be for source separated organics. But the cost is high. These are relative. And I wanted to get the metric, but I couldn't find the slide, where they've done it for just traditional, putting it in a landfill. Relativize the cost to what is the cost. Of course, there's these externalities that we don't care about the cost to the environment, so we don't put a dollar value on that. But we can. But this is purely economic cost. Then we have aerobic composting. So this can be done with windrows, setting up large windrows in a large area of space. We have acreage in Rockbridge County. It would be great. This would be a good alternative, but aerobic composting can also take place in containers, like our small earth tub that we have on the back campus. It's still aerobic. We mix it, we let air in there, and it's actually actively breaking down. It's a proven technology for a select waste stream. They're having a lot of success now in taking in household residual waste. One of the words that I learned several years ago when I went to my first meeting, well, I'd heard the word, but never used this way. Putrescible solids. Things that smell. Right? It's just a fancy way. But household waste, when you're getting beyond, plant-based matter, if you're talking about plate scrapings and gravy and fats and oils, which you can, in a good commercial system, you can go up to 40%, those fatty, oily, cheesy things. It's done properly. You can't do it in your backyard composter, right? Because your neighbors won't like you, and the raccoons and possums and everything else will love you. But you can do that with windrow composting now. They've gotten the technology with proper aeration and the appropriate tools and monitoring devices. They've actually got a stinkometer. That's what I call it. But it actually can monitor for the standard odors. And it's a network that's around the area that will monitor it and actually can change the aeration of the piles based on a detector system. We talked to that guy down in Austin last year. It's essentially a digital nose. Kind of neat stuff. But it needs source separated organics. But it's low cost. There's some equipment investment, some site prep, but it's the lowest cost alternative. But you're not making energy out of it. And I think probably the highest use, if you're going to have that organic matter in the waste stream, is we should get some energy out of that carbon, the energy from the sun, those carbon bonds, and then make some compost out of it. That's my personal take on it. But high versus low cost, this is actually not a bad way to start. And then you can mix in anaerobic digestion later and compost the residuals from that and still make a high quality product. Refuse-derived fuel combustion. This is one we had some non-requested proposals come into the county for. Syngas, essentially where you pyrolysis, you heat up garbage so high that it turns into a gas, and then you burn that gas and create electricity from it. I'll talk about mass burn combustion separate. Now, commercially proven, yes, it is commercially proven. It can be done. Now, the companies that talked to us, the first one, that was not a commercially proven technology, but there are European commercially proven technologies that do work. And they have really done a lot with emissions to control for that. Unfortunately, the company that came in, well, for multiple reasons, I don't think that was a good choice. I don't like the idea of importing trash into a county. That's just not a good thing. But what's nice, you can take the entire waste stream. You can throw everything in there except some, certain things. But you can incinerate just about everything. But what comes out the other end, there is some waste ash. That's not something you can use, and it's actually considered hazardous waste. So that to me is not a good use of carbon bonds coming from the sun or anything else. Because even our fossil fuel comes from the sun just too many thousands of years ago. Mass burn combustion, I have an apartment next to one of these in Syracuse, Onondaga County. It's just an incinerator. It just burns the trash. Nothing's gained from it, but it's a great way to get rid of your trash if you have an issue with it. It's commercially proven, emissions are handled. Risk is limited unless you're downstream of the smokestack and something's gone wrong. And it can take the entire waste stream. But again, very high cost for this RFD technology, and then high cost for mass burn combustion. But this is a technology that's been around. Well, we have a burn barrel up in the Adirondacks. That's the same approach, just not a very good stat. When my grandmother told me to burn a foam burn tray when I was about 8 years old, which we didn't have a lot of on the farm. I refused to do it, so I think that early on I understood that black smoke was just not good. Then there's a mixed waste MRF, and this is really a treatment approach. And Texas is really jumping on these MRFs. It's where you essentially go in, it's a material recovery facility, and on a long conveyor belt, separate things based on blowing air through them and floating them and vibrating them through different sizes. And then at the end, you have a bunch of people visually inspecting it. It can be done that high tech, or kind of what they're doing to some extent at the county right now. You dump it out on the floor, spread it around, and look for stuff. That's the extremely low tech method. The nice thing about the high-end ones is it can wash recyclables. You know, if something's been soiled, an aluminum can is not as valuable to a recycler as if it's already been rinsed, and that's what these other ones do, and they recycle the water. The one down that's just outside of Austin, I've seen videos, it's incredible to watch. But that's Austin, they're a bunch of hippies, right? So, although Dallas is getting ready to install one, Texas is really jumping on this because they've got the space, but they don't want to put the stuff in there.
There's one in Zion's Crossing.
There is. So, but it doesn't really do anything with the waste except you get your recyclables out, and then you still have waste. And a lot of them do that. They have a county or a state has you have to recycle X, X, and X. So you put in a MRF to pull those things out, and then the rest of it goes to the landfill. But a MRF would be a great way for the county, and a transfer station that's already been built that may not be a transfer station down the road, to put in a facility that could separate out these things. And I think the best way to approach that is with a private partnership. Don't put the burden on the counties or the cities to staff this and run it. Come up with a contractual agreement for somebody that's willing to do this. You capture the recyclables. They can either do something with the organics themselves or give them to somebody else and have them compost them or do anaerobic digestion. I think that's a really good opportunity. And the cost is medium. And it's sometimes this very high. We're talking orders of magnitude monetary differences. It's just a relativized range. But aerobic composting windrow, you could get started with that if you had the land. And our clay is actually good for starting one of these. You just have to put down the cement with seepage drains and a collection pond for anything that does drain. And that gets recirculated back on the compost. Talking to a few people at the meeting, $250,000 you can get started with a small scale windrow composting system. That may not cover all of the equipment, right? They always bump you up once you actually start talking. But that's really not if you're going to talk about taking about 50% of your waste stream, I should point that out, 50% of your waste stream is compostable. 70% is compostable if you don't have a recycling program and you have soil paper. So the national average, and states have done this. If you don't have a good recycling program for paper, 70% of municipal solid waste is compostable. And you can't recycle paper once it gets wet, so it might as well be composted. But the best thing to do would be to pull that out. Although the composters argue over that. They would rather just compost the paper because they say recycling is bad for the environment. That's a composter's perspective on things. Another good issue for setting up anaerobic digestion and compost, we can use the energy, there's no doubt there, but that's a high cost thing. But compost right now is a valuable commodity. We're not a large producer in this area. Nobody's making, we have Royal Oak making compost out of 2 or 3 primary feedstocks. And it could very well be that Royal Oak could be compelled to receive our organics, but hauling fees would be just like hauling it to a landfill. So you got to get it over the mountain and down past Big Island. So that's not ideal. Getting it up to Black Bear, he's just northwest of Waynesboro, right, is his location. So that's not a large hauling, but it still is going to cost some money. But if we could do it locally, then we'll save some money and keep the organic matter here, and it could be sold for a profit or used in the cities and the counties. But the volumes we're talking about would be way beyond what the cities and the county could use in plantings and things like that. And it wouldn't have to be a high-priced item either. There's a lot of opportunities for different products. But it is a commodity that can be sold. One of the themes that I kept hearing at the meeting this January was, some markets are getting glutted with composters. So they're trying to find the next thing to do with their compost so that they can get a bigger market share than the compost company down the street. We're not there yet. Because they're talking about doing soil blends and all these good things. And that's what Royal Oak has. Their compost is just a piece of what they do. They sell lots of soil blends and other things like that, and chips. So there's a lot of opportunity there if the appropriate partnership can be found.
Bill?
Yes?
When I look at that pie chart, it's a national pie chart, not Rockbridge, Kansas, but in any case, when it talks about organics, it lumps in, like paper is organic. And a big chunk of it, actually, paper and cardboard is a huge chunk of the national waste stream. But it's a high carbon, and therefore, the actual kitchen scraps, as I recall, was like 20%, very small. And that's the one that has the nitrogen that would need to be. So when you talk about composting that at 50%, how do you balance it out with the kind of organics that are needed to be?
Well, so here's some of the case studies that I went and saw. California's running into that very problem. San Francisco is close to setting, they've set a zero waste goal. I think zero waste, it's a great goal, but it scares people. So waste diversion, I agree, we're on the same table there, but I think to discuss it, it's diverting your waste to the best place. That seems to be the terminology that gets the variety of stakeholders to agree. We need to divert our waste from the landfill, and how do you do that? And they're having problems in California because they're getting lawn scraps, clippings, tree clippings, which are still high nitrogen, very low carbon, and then they've been recycling very well for 15, 20 years. So they're finding other feedstocks, and it's really just going out and beating the bushes for other feedstocks. There's always yard debris, limbs, trees, every time we have a storm, which, climate change might help the composting industry, I don't know. But it's just finding the other feedstocks. And it hasn't really become a huge problem, though, because not everybody complies with recycling. So there's always paper in the waste stream, and that organic matter is always there. And it's still, percentage-wise, like you said, household plate scrapings and things like that are 20 to 30% of the waste stream. Add in dining, though, if you talk about your restaurants, and we have 10 or 11 restaurants, I can never pinpoint it down, but just in the city of Lexington, they're even higher, and they soil a lot of cardboard just in the process. So it is something to be mindful of down the road, that if your program gets so good that you run out of browns, that's an awesome problem, that you've got so much N. But that's where anaerobic digestion can take care of part of the problem. Because what anaerobic digestion does is it gobbles up that nitrogen and produces a high carbon output. And that's what's taking place in Germany and Spain, is that, even though they have plenty of carbon, but you can use that. They essentially, if it's 100% of a batch, 70% will go to anaerobic digestion, 30% will be saved to go add back to the waste of that anaerobic digestion and make compost. So you can hold things around. I don't know if that answers your question.
You got to work.
Yeah, it's an effort, but we're already, we're talking about it. We're not even there yet. So, you have to think about it when you're going to start setting up a plan. But we got to get people to stop throwing newspapers in the trash first.
I'm wondering, what is it that makes anaerobic digestion so expensive? And I'm imagining you have to have a lot of tanks because it's very slow.
Well, they're now, the commercial ones are down to 18-day retention times. And that's continuous addition. So it's essentially, they stratify in the tank. It's a large conical tank. And you can continuously add from the top, and the way they've designed the mixers is that the stuff that's no longer digestible settles out of the bottom, and you drain that off. The computer drains it off when necessary, and you're continuously adding from the top. And of course, you have to design your system appropriately so that you can continuously add. There are set it and forget it. There's actually semi-dry and dry anaerobic digestion systems, which I almost think would be a better alternative in Rockbridge County. They use essentially an old, it looks like a container, ship a seagoing container set up. And you can add your biosolids that are high wet to get the moisture, and they also have some nitrogen in them, and do your mixes right there, and then collect the gas and go
So you
from
are
there.
collecting.
And then the product that comes out of there can be further composted in a windrow, mixed in with leaves and all that other stuff, and make a high quality compost.
Other than the fact that it's a proprietary technology, what do you think about thermal depolymerization?
Thermal who?
Depolymerization?
So essentially high energy like syngas production?
Well, it's you take the organic waste, you put it in 600 psi with 700 degrees Fahrenheit, and it breaks into oil.
Right.
And natural gas.
Yeah, yeah. I think that that's an interesting concept, but the energy going into that, I mean, one company presented on that, and they designed a unit that will still produce leftover electricity and it runs itself.
Yeah, that's what
That's the key. Is
the pilot plant in Carthage, Minnesota, that's used. It's a butterball turkey packaging plant where they package 30,000 turkeys a day. They use the methane that's derived from the process as their on-site source, and then the oil that's generated is used to run a small thermal electric plant nearby.
Yeah, and I think a combination of all those technologies are great, but the high cost of that is just not tractable for most people, and that's private companies doing it.
Yeah, that's Warren Buffett is invested in that.
So jump on board, Warren Buffett did. I think we've kind of gotten to that. I've already talked through a lot of these future possibilities, but we need to start with, well, educate always should start the beginning. But once you educate people, you need to separate it. We can use AD for anaerobic digestion for energy. We can use biosolids, human and bovine, for additional inputs for anaerobic digestion and or composting. You can compost human biosolids, and it's acceptable. They get tested to the same stringency standards that any compost does. There's no real issues there. You're breaking it down with bacteria. The E. coli that are in there, they don't live. There are issues with some pathogens, but they get pathogen tested. I spent a whole 3-hour session just looking at how they test compost. It's only as good as the facility that does the testing, but we trust that they're certified. And then you can compost the residuals from this. So there's lots of opportunities for working your way through the highest possible use, and starting with don't produce it unless you need to. And then return that organic matter back to our soils. And keep it here in the county, growing produce, improve agricultural productivity. And I think it, if done well, it's a marketing opportunity. It's not a lot of this is taking place in the state of Virginia or in our little part of the Mid-Atlantic. So it could be, if done well, we could really become a leader in this area. So that's all I have. Thank you.
It's hard to talk about what's going on this week.
Oh, yeah. If anybody is interested, we are going to the landfill for a tour. You can meet in the Great Hall of the Science Center at around 9:30. Excuse me. And a geology truck will be going so we can carpool. So if anybody's interested.
What day?
It's Saturday.
So Saturday here, 9:30 a.m.
Well, in the Great Hall.
in the Great Hall of Science Center. If you want to go check out the landfill. And you already did the wastewater treatment plant, right?
We did, yes.
So that's part of SEAL's sustainability month. And so what I wanted, we had started a while back. Actually, John Blackburn, the owner of Pure Eats and Red Hen, got together several of us, several mornings. Catherine Truitt, Pat Foreman, Hunt Regal, Chris. Anybody else? Well, at the time it was. Yeah, you came a couple times. Claire Collins at the time. We met to talk about getting these things going. That kind of got Catherine into looking into doing something with compost at the Horse Center. But if anybody wants to, I want to get that going again, to be a community group with appropriate people. Spencer Suter was going to try and make it, but he had other engagements. But I have One nice thing about the brewery next to the county building is I get to talk to a lot of the county administrators after hours. And then I have the power. So I've been in his ear and going to set up a meeting with him. So if anybody's interested in that, I'm serious about getting us thinking about this. And I think this is something that we need to be pursuing. Because no matter whether our trash is getting transported to another county in Virginia or staying here in a new landfill, it just shouldn't have organic matter in it. So, thanks.
Thank you. There appears to be a lot of pizza in the back.